that background, we return to the celebrations that were going on at the start of our portion this week, Shmini, as the Miluim were being concluded with the formal inauguration of the Mishkan. It was the 8th day. It was the day of the great ordination of Aharon HaKohen to become Kohen Gadol and assumed that role from Moshe Rabbeinu, who had been the temporary, so to speak, Kohen Gadol during the previous 7 days as the preparations were being done. As you know, Moshe Rabbeinu originally, it seems, might have been the Kohen Gadol. That might have been the original plan. But because he continued saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the time of the fiery bush, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying to give him that authority, and he kept saying, I'm not worthy and I don't think I should have it, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu finally said, okay, your brother will be that. So Moshe got a taste of the kahuna and then handed it off to Aharon as it was time now to inaugurate the Mishkan. Okay. The most say that the Mishkan, the entire Miluim was from the 23rd of Adar to the 30th of Adar, and therefore the official launching was the 1st of Nisan, and others say that the Miluim were the 1st to the 7th of Nisan, and the launching was on the 8th of Nisan. Now that the commanded sacrifices were all prepared, and everybody was basically gathered at the Ohel Moed for an extraordinary, kind of like another Gilui Shechina. We already had seen HaKadosh Baruch Hu at Har Sinai when we got the Aseres Dibros. Before that, also at the Kriyas Yamsuf. So there were a few times that the entire nation assembled and had a divine revelation like that. And this was like the 3rd time. There would be, as it turned out, lightning to come down from Shemayim and take up the carbon, and it would give rise to an extraordinary nationwide yelling, and both a mix of celebration and what they would call nowadays shock and awe. And that was what was happening. At that moment, Moshe Rabbeinu instructs Aharon to address the nation in Pasuk Tes, in Perek Tes Pasuk Gimel. It's to show the nation that he indeed, Aharon HaKohen, now is in charge of the kahuna. That's why Moshe tells him, you make the speech. And it also, by the way, gives another public affirmation that Aharon has been forgiven for whatever he did during the Chet HaEgel. To the degree that questions would remain, well, the fact that he's now the one at the launching of the Mishkan, it confirms to the nation that he has been forgotten. And this is brought out both by the Ramban and the Kli Yakar on that Pasuk Gimel in Perek Tes. Torah delineates that in the preparation for this moment, the sacrifices, the Kabbanis, were precisely, in every which way, prepared in the strictest adherence to every detail, because the nation knew now HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to appear, so to speak. And this would demonstrate, the Malbim says, the worthiness of the nation of Israel to be at that moment, to be receiving that. Now, they always would begin every day with an Olah. And after the Olah, then would come, let's say, the Chatas. But here, at the Mishkan's inauguration, first Aharon offers the Chatas. Unlike every other Chatas offerings, for which the Kohen would eat some of the meat, Aharon's not eating anything from this. It goes up completely. Part of it, of course, is that when someone offers a Chatas, they don't eat from their own Chatas, because Chatas is for a wrongdoing, and to eat some of the meat from a Chatas would be a benefit. You get a nice meat meal. And same thing with a Kohen. When he's offering a Chatas, he shouldn't eat his own Chatas, because a Chatas implies there was a wrongdoing for which expiation is sought, and if he eats from his own chattis, so the entire chattis is offered up. And it's at this moment, as the chattis is being offered up, that he is about now to be vested as the Kohen Gadol. And indeed, it's at this point that he blesses the entire nation for the first time in his role as the Kohen Gadol. And some say he recited the threefold blessing, Bracha HaMishaleshes B'Torah, that he did it at that time for the first time at the Mishkan's inauguration, even though it appears later in the Sefer Bamidbar in Perek Vav, it seems that perhaps he actually recited it for the first time at the inauguration of the Mishkan. Some say it was a blessing recited for that moment, Dafka, the blessing he recited at the Mishkan. So Moshe and Aharon went into the Ohel Moed, perhaps to pray for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to appear in his glory with fire, to manifest his accepting the korbanos. That's what Rashbam believes. Rashi brings it. And they exited and blessed the people. And suddenly the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared before the entire nation, Pasuk Chaf Gimel. An extraordinary fire miraculously appeared, a divine fire, and consumed the entirety of the korbanos. The stunned nation responded again with shouts of awe. Now, what happened next is shrouded in mystery. Aharon's two oldest sons, Nadav and Avihu, this was their day. If this was the day that Aharon officially became Kohen Gadol, this was the day they officially became Kohanim. We think of them, of course, the sons of Kohen, its lineage and Kohanim, but as we know, for example, Pinchas did not yet become a Kohen. That's only at the beginning of the Parsha on Pinchas. That it did not initially go by lineage. It was HaKadosh Baruch Hu designated certain people to be Kohanim, specifically Aharon and the four sons, Nadav and Avihu and Elazar and Itamar. Okay. So it was at this moment that Nadav and Avihu, in their own excitement, and they were the older two, so therefore they were like the, so to speak, if Aharon a Kohen Gadol, they're like the chief under Kohanim, because there's only four, and they're the older two. So they brought their kataras with great excitement. This was their moment too. And something happened. The Torah tells us it was an Eish Zara. It was an alien foreign light, fire, and it consumed them. Now, why that happens is a lot of what I'll be talking about further now. They did not consult with Moshe or with Aharon. Is it okay if we come and bring our own kataras? Rather, they saw what was going on. They saw what was happening, and this extraordinary divine fire came down and consumed Nadav and Avihu. Some say their bodies were burned, and others, noting that their tunics were not singed, believe that four flaming strings came down from heaven. Two flying strings entered Nadav's his nostrils, and two Avihu's nostrils, and that they burned that way. That's what's brought out in the Gemara in Sanhedrin Nun Beis Amud Aleph. And the assemblage, the Kahal, was just shocked. So the Rabbanim, the Chazal discuss what in the world brought this on them. What was their sin? And so it's talked about. Opinions are many, and there's an incredible discussion in Yalkut Shimoni on Shmini in Chelek Tuf Kuf Chaf Dalet, and it just goes on, and it's brought down also by Kli Yakar in Perek Yud Pasuk Beis. Some say this was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's extraordinary moment, and they were, so to speak, raining on his parade. That was not the moment, as he was revealing himself for the third time, counting Ma'amad Har Sinai and counting Kriyas Yamsuf. He was revealing himself and teaching and declaring essentially to the entire nation that the Mishkan is his abode. He is moving in and living permanently among Klal Yisrael. And that needs to sink in. When other nations then and even now claim that they have the true faith, the true religion, and they even invoke our Tanakh, our Torah, as some kind of a proof that they are the inheritors, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is manifesting then, and it's so to this day, that he plants his abode among Klal Yisrael. We and only we are the ones with whom he lives. And if he's not living mamish with us, as today in Yerushalayim, well, for example, our Tzion is temporarily polluted by the invasive force and that invasive building that doesn't belong there. Nevertheless, we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's in Yerushalayim and he's in exile, and he'll be returning there at the Har HaBayit, at the Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi. So this was his moment, and it was not for Nadav and Avihu to suddenly show up uninvited, so to speak, and to interfere with his parade. So that's one opinion. Secondly, there was a thought that, as I said earlier, they did not ask permission from Moshe Rabbeinu and from Aharon. Is it okay if we do this? And Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon were the so-called Piskei Halacha, Poskei Halacha. And you don't paskin in the presence of a posek greater than you. You have to ask a shaila. And you can't just go. In fact, it's chayav misa. We know that whole story, for example, the story of Shmuel in the presence of Eli, and you can't paskin in the presence of your Rav, much less in the presence of Moshe and Aharon. And so there are those who hold that that's the reason. Thirdly, this was precisely the kind of Eish Zara, alien fire, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had warned explicitly not to bring. In the words of the Torah, they had brought a fire that had not been commanded of them. Eish Zara, Asher Lo Tziva Osam, as it's in Pasuk Aleph of Parakut. Another opinion is that when the Jews were in the process of experiencing the Gilui Shechina at Har Sinai, at Mamad Har Sinai, that as the Jews were walking towards Har Sinai to receive HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah, Nadav and Avihu were walking behind Aharon and Moshe Rabbeinu among the entourage of dignitaries, and one of them said to the other, behind their backs, when these old men are gone, we will be the leaders of the nation. And a bas kol came from Shemayim and said, we will see who buries whom. And that's brought in the Gemara Sanhedrin, also Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Some say the sin was not so much that they contemplated that they're going to take over, but the sin was their disrespectful language, referring to Moshe and Aharon as old men. The disrespect is what brought about HaKadosh Baruch Hu taking them on that occasion at the Mishkan when they brought the Eish Zara. And yet another, that they weren't wearing their me'il. They're going to be Kohanim. They have to wear the me'il of the Kohen at the Mishkan. And the me'il, each of the vestments of the Big Day Kohen has a special, extra special something to it. Another form of kapara. And the me'il is the kapara for Lashon Hara. That's what a me'il is for the Kohen. It's brought out, for example, in Daf Peches Samad Beis of Masechet Tzvachim. And so if a Kohen performs any kind of Masa Kahuna like that, ritual service where he's offering a carbon and he's not wearing all his karbanos, is all of his begadim, he's liable to Misa B'dei Shemayim. And that's in the Gemara, in Pei Gimel Amid Aleph of Masechet Sanhedrin. So there are many other opinions as well as to what was the sin of Nadav and Avihu that brought on them the tremendous suffering and death, and what did that do to the day of Elisheva? People don't normally, as we're learning the Parsha, we don't normally think of Elisheva. Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadav. This was the day that when she woke up in the morning, it was the day that her husband was going to be vested in the presence of Klal Yisrael as Kohen Gadol. And her brother-in-law, Moshe Rabbeinu, who had been the temporary Kohen Gadol, so to speak, was going to be not only handing over the authority to Aharon, but she had the pride that, look, that's my brother-in-law, and look what a day this is for him. And for my husband, for my brother Nachshon, who's the leader of Shevet Yehuda, the most important tribe in the nation, depending on how you rate them vis-a-vis Kohanim. He's the leader, the first one to march when the nation marches. And my sons today officially become Kohanim. What a morning that must have been. For her, she started the day, and by the end of the day, she's sitting Shiva. So how do we understand all of this? We have many explanations. I brought you some of them. And we understand this, that one opinion, another opinion, is the Kohen who brings sacrifices. Kohen has to be married. We know from the Yom Kippur, the Musaf Shmona Esrei repetition, Chazor Shatz Ashkenazic Musaf on Yom Kippur. And we know from our learning that Kohen Gadol had to be married. There was even an opinion in the Gemara that they had to have a backup wife standing in for the other wife. If, God forbid, the Kohen Gadol's wife would die a moment before Yom Kippur started, there needed to be a backup wife so he could be married right away to go into Yom Kippur married. That's an opinion in the Gemara. So there's an understanding you have to be married. Nadav and Avihu were not married. And there's an opinion that the very fact that they did not have a wife is the reason that they died. And it's cited in the Kli Yakar. And there's yet another opinion, very famous one, Balabatim have heard this especially, that has something to do with drinking alcohol. That maybe they had drunk some alcohol before they brought their Eish Zara, and as Kohanim who had been under inducement of alcohol, that itself would make them chayav misa, to bring a carbon while drunk, or if not drunk, just under alcohol. Indeed, we know, and that's why Balabatim know it, or at least a lot, that on Simchas Torah, we so atypically, for example, let's say we do the Berchas Kohanim at the Shacharis of Simchas Torah instead of the Musaf. I always do it at Musaf. So the thing is, because a Kohen should not be serving as a Kohen in ritual form when he's had alcohol, and since everybody's going to take a shot of schnapps after getting an aliyah on Simchas Torah, so if he's going to get an aliyah on Simchas Torah, drink schnapps, he can't recite the 3 brachas at Musaf. So we move him up to Shacharis for the brachas before he's had any alcohol. So here in Nadav and Avihu, perhaps they had drunk alcohol. We don't know for sure, but a lot of the Mefarshim bring it because right after the Maisa of Nadav and Avihu, the Torah right away is already, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is warning Kohanim that they shouldn't get drunk. So they put one and one together, and maybe the placement of one right after the other is to imply that Nadav and Avihu perhaps had some alcohol, and perhaps that was what they did. So there are so many different reasons that we have when it comes to this. So here's a question I would bring. Presumably over the years, many others have brought it also. Why don't we just have a straight out answer, a straight out explanation? What was their sin? Why were they punished? Why do we have 5, 10 different opinions in Kli Yakar, in Kli Yakar citing Yalkut Shimoni? Why don't we just have an explanation? Why were they punished? Something so severe? The would have been Kohen Gadol number 2 and number 3 in Jewish history. And they were taken from us at such a holy time. What did they do? We understand with Korach. He brought a forbidden guitarist, and we know what happened to him. And no one walks around wondering, I wonder what Korach did to deserve that. But there are 2 types of situations, at least that come to mind in the Torah, where we have the most severe of penalties, and yet not quite sure what the sin was. One, Nadav and Avihu, we just talked about, and the other, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon HaKohen at the time of Mei Merivah, when in the nation is screaming they want water, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, take your staff, take your rod, and go to the rock, and tell the rock to give the water. So we all grew up with the Rashi. When we're kids, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, we learned the Rashi that the sin of Moshe Rabbeinu is that he was told to hit the rock, to talk to the rock, and he hit the rock. And for many of us, that's what we understood for the next 10 to 20 years. And then one day, each and every one of us learned the Ramban in that Parsha, Chukas, Perek Chav. And it turns out, wow, there are a lot of different opinions. Maybe he was punished because he showed rage. That's the Rambam. That he should have spoken to the people in a nice way, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe thought it was perfectly legitimate to beg and clamor for water. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not respond with rage. He told Moshe, go to the rock, talk to the rock. So maybe the people would be seeing in Moshe a reflection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response. And if Moshe would be calm, they would see that was HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response. But since Moshe responded with rage, Shimuna Hamorim, so it implied to the people that God was raging and inexplicably angry, and it interfered with understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ways. Maybe that was the sin. Maybe the sin was that he got too dramatic, that instead of softly hitting the rock and just go and hit the rock, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to bring a rod. So use the rock, use the staff. But maybe he did it too dramatically. Here, everybody, watch this. And just as maybe Nadav and Avihu stepped into HaKadosh Baruch Hu's limelight, so to speak, at the miracle of the Mishkan and the lightning coming down from heaven, maybe Moshe and Aharon were stepping into the limelight in a way they should not have. Many things. And maybe they were supposed to talk to the rock and not hit the rock. And there are other explanations. Just that one Ramban is an eye-opener for someone who grew up in Yeshiva Ketana and all his life told other people, I know what Moshe did. He hit the rock, didn't speak to the rock. So why is it that the deaths of Nadav and Avihu remain mysterious? With so many possible, not that they did all of those things, but maybe one or the other is the reason that they died. And likewise with Moshe and Aharon. Maybe it was one or the, all we know is Ya'en lo ha'amantem bi, lahakti sheni. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you did not believe in me to make me holy before the eyes of the nation. They didn't believe in God. Moshe Rabbeinu did not believe in God. that after the Parsha of Chukas, for the rest of the Torah, there are not many manifestations of Moshe Rabbeinu believing in God, Aharon HaKohen believing in God. They didn't see the man from heaven every day. They didn't see the well coming, and then suddenly Miriam dies, and they didn't believe in God. Yan lo himantem. They didn't constantly mekadesh Hashem before the eyes of the nation. So what was the sin? I'd like to make a suggestion, just a suggestion. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to suggest, maybe, let me emphasize maybe, who am I to, but maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want us to know what the sin was of Nadav and Avihu and what the sin was of Moshe and Aharon. Maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt, who are we? We are not worthy to sit and view and discuss and analyze and comment on these sins. It's none of our business. How about that? Because we're never going to anyway be at the Miluim, and the day that the Mishkan is inaugurated, we're not going to be there. Next in line to be Kohanim after the Kohen Gadol number one. Why do we need to know? It's not a situation that ever will apply to us. Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon and a Kohen. We're never going to be told by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, go to a rock or some other thing by my word and bring about such a miracle for the entire nation of Israel. I don't even know if any of us ever in a lifetime brings about a miracle for anybody. But to bring about a miracle for the entire nation of Israel, we're never going to be in that position. Lahakdi Sheni, to bring that kind of a Kiddush Hashem. So we don't have to know. There's no warning for us. Korach, there's a warning. Somebody oversteps his place and tells a Moshe Rabbeinu, or for that matter, a Gadol Ador today, I'm a nothing compared to this Gadol Ador, and I march in and I paskin in front of him. Who am I? So we're being warned to mind our place, understand who we are and who we're not. And we need to know that for a person to walk into such a place as Korach did, that's more than asking for trouble. But for what Moshe Rabbeinu and Aharon, for what Nadav and Avihu and did, we don't need to know. We're never going to be in that situation. So out of respect to them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it that we never would know. We'd never be able to say, I wouldn't have done that. I would not have made that mistake. If God had told me to talk to a rock and not to hit a rock, I would have talked to the rock. I wouldn't be looking. Who are we to know and talk and put ourselves in? I would like to suggest that that is the humbling kind of a nivus that HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only was respecting for Moshe and Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, but was trying to help implant into us that we must always live our lives with anivus and not to think that we're better than the next one. And if we had been offered test A or test B, I could have handled that like a piece of cake. But always to live with the anivus of knowing that we are tested, and as long as we focus on at least meeting our standard, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would hopefully like to see us achieve, then we're doing what we should do.